today we are going to have some story from Reddit. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below. These simple clips mean a lot to the future of this channel.
I was already late catching my flight when my boss, Marvin, made me pull over at the house. I've generally avoided meeting clients directly, preferring to keep my professional interactions detached and impersonal. Helen Harris answered the door. After confirming her identity, I requested identification. Once she returned, I handed her a tape of her husband's recent cell phone calls and messages. Helen, who appeared indifferent, asked if there was anything significant on the tape and expressed frustration with the service, threatening to demand a refund if no useful information was found. She thanked me and closed the door. As I walked back to my car, I reflected on why I continued in this line of work. Helen, with her disheveled appearance and the overpowering smell from the bedroom, reinforced my preference for avoiding client meetings. She seemed to be in her late 30s, wearing only a thin housecoat and showing signs of recent affair. The male voice I heard from the other room instructing "get her A back in there" couldn't have come from Helen Harris's husband, as he was in Detroit at an automotive convention. He was the target of my investigation, assigned to me because Marvin wanted to keep the case despite previous operatives' failures. Helen seemed to suspect her husband of infidelity, yet she was cheating on him herself. It baffled me why they didn't just divorce and move on. It was clear the issue was money, a common factor in the disintegration of relationships that once started with love. My name is Doris Baxter, and after years in this job, I had lost faith in love. As I waited at the airport, I reflected on this while checking in. Despite my attractiveness and toned body, which men often found appealing, I had grown disillusioned with relationships. On the plane, a man named Frank Compton moved to sit next to me. I quickly pulled up his information on my laptop and showed him his own file, which shocked him. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in small talk or new friends, and warned him to return to his original seat or face consequences with his wife. Frank complied and quickly retreated. I then reviewed a picture of Mark Harris, who at 28 was significantly younger than his wife. Initially, I thought he was good-looking, but as I read his file, I realized that my assumptions about his infidelity were likely influenced by Helen's suspicions. Looking at the file, I saw a young, attractive man married to an older, less appealing woman. Initially, I thought he married her for her money, but further investigation revealed she had no income and didn't work. The idea of a child was ruled out as they had none. The case grew more intriguing. Hours later, as the plane descended, I couldn't shake the image of him from my mind. He was handsome and only a few months older than me, yet married to a woman 10 years his senior. I checked into the Westin Hotel in Detroit, part of the Renaissance Center, close to Cobo Hall where the convention was being held. The hotel was nice but forgettable, and I rarely stayed in one place long enough to care about details. I called the office in Chicago to update them. Carla, Marvin's wife, answered. She mentioned that Daryl would assist me since Carl, our office manager, was preoccupied with his wife's impending labor. Carla laughed off my concern, noting that every case had its oddities. After hanging up, I dressed in a conservative tan skirt suit that accentuated my curves and highlighted my honey blonde hair. The silk blouse had gaps that revealed my lace bra if noticed. I grabbed my laptop and headed to Cobo Hall, blending in as a distributor or buyer to observe Mr. Harris. My laptop and cell phone were equipped with powerful digital cameras to capture any misconduct. As I walked through the automotive components displays, I pretended to be interested, but I was baffled by the obsession with replacing perfectly functional exhaust systems with louder, similar-looking ones. While contemplating this, I spotted Mark Harris, who looked even better in person than in his photos. His appearance and effortless movement, unlike the often disappointing reality of photographs, impressed me. He was more muscular and graceful than expected, navigating the crowd with ease and frequently stopping to engage with various displays. Following him was challenging. He moved quickly and skillfully through the crowd, making it hard to keep up. Despite being nearly caught several times, I managed to track him as he interacted with different booths and took notes on items of interest. One moment that really startled me was when Mark Harris suddenly turned around and headed back to a booth, moving so swiftly that I braced for a collision. Remarkably, he avoided me entirely and offered a polite apology, flashing a shy but charming smile. At that moment, I realized that my professional detachment was slipping. Despite trying to act disinterested, I was drawn to him, and I noticed that many women were trying to get his attention. However, his lack of interest in them suggested he might be in a serious relationship. I considered 3 possibilities. He was gay, too focused on work, or in love. Discarding the first, I focused on the latter 2, with the possibility of a serious relationship seeming the most lucrative. If he was indeed in a relationship, I could gather evidence for his wife and potentially earn more. Now that I was on the case, I was determined to find out.
Mark. That afternoon, despite missing Helen, I realized how much I loved automotive trade shows. The only thing that could make it better would be if Helen joined me. I remembered how she used to come to shows early in our marriage, and I still admired her, especially her figure. As usual, I was excited but had to balance my focus. On one hand, there were vendors I wanted to work with for my company. On the other, I had a list of modifications for my Mustang. I also had meetings with business contacts and fellow road warriors, keeping interactions friendly but professional. I avoided the display girls, valuing my marriage too much. At 28, I felt like an old soul, committed to staying faithful. I still loved my 2006 Mustang GT, even though I disliked the 2010 changes. I had upgraded my taillights to sequential ones, which I enjoyed. My approach to women mirrored my views on cars. Why bother with someone new when I had a perfectly good partner in Helen? While walking around the trade show, I almost collided with a striking woman with honey blonde hair. I awkwardly maneuvered around her and apologized, but she seemed unimpressed. I hoped I wouldn't have to do business with her company, given my poor first impression. After a few hours, I took a break at the food court and got the last available table. Soon, the woman I'd nearly bumped into asked if she could join me, and I agreed. She was pretty, but didn't seem to use her looks to her advantage. Before we could talk, 2 display girls I'd seen earlier plopped down at our table without asking. They ignored my table mate and focused on me, but I made it clear I wasn't interested. When they didn't take the hint, I excused myself, saying I needed to call my wife, and left them to their conversation.
Doris. As I sat down near Mark, I hoped to use a bit of flirtation to get him to engage, aiming to wrap up the case quickly. However, Mark didn't initiate any conversation and focused on his product brochures, which was a blow to my ego. 2 display models then approached, sat down, and blocked me out of the conversation. I started recording their interaction with my laptop's camera. I was pretty sure these 2 would get some kind of reaction from him. Despite their efforts, Mark's responses were brief and unwelcoming. He made it clear with hand gestures highlighting his wedding band that he wasn't interested. Nevertheless, the women persisted, possibly targeting married men who might be less likely to cause a scene. Eventually, Mark got frustrated, stood up, and said he needed to call his wife before leaving. The models then finally noticed me and asked if we knew each other. After I explained that we were just sharing a table, the brunette mentioned her interest in Mark. She noted that while many men at these events act unprofessionally, Mark was different. He was consistently respectful and well-regarded among vendors, and his professional behavior stood out. She admired his faithfulness to his wife, seeing it as a positive sign of his commitment. The brunette expressed confidence in her ability to attract any man, including Mark, and was determined to pursue him. Her cold demeanor suggested she saw me as a potential rival, or at least felt the need to assert her dominance. The blonde chimed in, claiming she intended to have a fling with Mark before the convention ended, leaving the brunette to do as she pleased afterward. For some reason, I was beginning to get angry. Luckily, I got a call from Daryl asking me to meet him at the concession stand. He informed me of a new plan for our target, which he admitted was somewhat underhanded. Daryl, who was a close friend and highly skilled, had proceeded without my approval, citing our lack of progress over the past 3 weeks. I reminded him that I was supposed to be in charge, though I knew from experience that Daryl's strong emotional involvement sometimes affected his judgment. Daryl's main flaw wasn't that he got emotionally involved with the cases. It was his fear of tarnishing his perfect track record. He never failed to deliver results and was determined to maintain that reputation. Daryl outlined his plan. Mark would attend a video presentation by American Muscle, then return to his hotel before the convention's opening night dinner, which would feature live music and dancing. Daryl had arranged for 4 escorts to meet Mark either at the presentation or the dinner, hoping one would compromise him and end the case. Despite agreeing to the plan, I had doubts. My subconscious, influenced by Mark's previous interactions, suggested he wasn't a cheater. After nearly a month of no evidence, I was inclined to believe that Mark Harris was faithful. An hour later, I found the American Muscle booth and spotted Mark sitting in the second row. I approached a man in an American Muscle polo who was assisting with the presentation. I hinted at a potential future meeting and he seated me in the front row reserved for employees. I chose to sit in front of Mark to ensure he would see me, while pretending not to notice him. This way I could make an impression without seeming obvious. I was eager for the show to start, but not particularly interested in the presentation itself. A slim, dark-haired woman entered the presentation area and approached Mark, asking if the seat next to him was taken. Though I couldn't hear his response, he looked around for other available seats. The woman, one of Daryl's hired escorts, sat down with an empty seat between them, placing her purse there to ensure they weren't separated. Observing Mark, it was clear he was unaware of his appeal. Instead of appreciating the attention, he seemed puzzled by her interest and wondered why she chose to sit next to him. The escort began conversing with Mark about the company and products, but he pretended not to hear her, scanning the area as if looking for someone else. When she mentioned this was her first convention, Mark falsely claimed ignorance about the company and suggested she simply watch the show. Mark buried his head in a brochure, hoping to end the conversation. However, Mara and Amy soon entered and approached Mark directly. Mara sat in the empty chair on his right, while Amy attempted to sit on his left where the escort's purse was placed. The escort swiftly moved her purse and took the seat herself, blocking Amy's attempt. Mark, visibly frustrated, stood up as Mara tried to pull him back down. "Honey, where are you going?" Mara asked, her subtle accent giving her words a hint of exoticism. I don't know you," Mark stammered. "Of course you do. We're old friends. You joined us at the food court," Amy added, joining in. The presence of the 2 women alone drew the attention of everyone nearby. As Mark hastily got up and started to leave, all eyes were on him. Feeling embarrassed, he glanced around the room and our eyes locked. At that moment, time seemed to freeze, and I felt a pang of sympathy for him. With my experience in investigations, I was skilled at detecting lies and hidden motives. In that moment, I was conflicted. Professionally, I was intrigued by the unfolding situation and wanted to observe the reactions of everyone involved to understand their motivations. Mara and Amy were clearly trying to ensnare Mark, using every opportunity to make contact. Even this chaotic scene worked in their favor by ensuring he noticed them and setting the stage for future interactions. They planned to apologize later to smooth things over and increase their chances of further contact, while also sabotaging the hooker's attempts. The hooker, aiming for a significant payday, was effectively sidelined. While she might earn a small fee for her efforts, her chance for a larger reward was diminished. My professional instincts felt compromised, as I realized we had crossed an ethical line by orchestrating a situation to make Mark appear unfaithful. Watching it unfold, I felt a pang of guilt for putting a man who was genuinely trying to be faithful in a compromising position. Mark, clearly distressed, excused himself and used his balance to step over a chair as he left. Our brief eye contact only deepened my regret, knowing he had been looking forward to the presentation I had disrupted.
Mark. I returned to my hotel room, seething about missing the American Muscle presentation. It wasn't just because they were already a client and I wanted to check out their new products, but also because they were my top source for aftermarket parts for my black 2006 Mustang GT. Something strange was happening. Those same 2 rude women from the food court were there again. It almost felt like they were following me. Maybe I'd inadvertently offended them, and now they were trying to get back at me by embarrassing me. I tried calling Helen at home. Her voice usually lifted my spirits when I was feeling low. Lately, though, she seemed perpetually irritable. I was starting to think she might be going through early menopause. Our choice to delay having kids until I found a job with less travel seemed increasingly questionable. Still, my desire to start a family didn't outweigh my need to be with Helen. "Why the hell are you calling me?" Helen snapped when she answered the phone. "I just needed to hear your voice," I said. "There are some strange people here and I'm not having the best time." "What do you want me to do?" she retorted. "Drop everything and fly to Detroit to comfort you? Damn it, Mark, you're an adult. I can't handle everything. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership. Pull your weight. I'm busy right now. Goodbye. I love you, Helen," I said to the dial tone. I changed into running shorts and a tank top, grabbed my iPod, and headed to the hotel's workout room.
Doris, Daryl and I returned to my hotel room to discuss our next steps. Daryl, ever the polite gentleman, waited by the door until I noticed him and invited him to sit. Daryl expressed disappointment, feeling our initial plan had potential until the other two women intervened. I clarified that they were not professionals. One was hoping to marry Mark, while the other wanted to have a fling with him before her friend's potential marriage. Despite the setback, Daryl remained optimistic, believing our plan could still succeed if those two didn't attend the dinner. I assured him that since the dinner was for customers and not vendors, we should have a clear shot. Daryl's phone rang with an update from Marvin. Carl's wife had gone into labor just in time for him to witness the birth. As Daryl relayed the news, I found myself briefly pondering the idea of having a family of my own, but quickly dismissed the thought. Since this case started, I've been having some really unsettling thoughts. "Daryl, what's your take on this case?" I asked him. "It's messed up," he replied. "This guy is pretty slick, I'll give him that. I'm not sure he's slicker than the guy we caught who was messing around with his kid's teacher, but eventually they always make a mistake. We'll get him, I'm certain." "Daryl, why are you so sure he's cheating?" I asked. "Oh my God," Daryl said. "Listen to this." He played a recording of Mark calling his wife after leaving the presentation. Daryl found it hilarious and kept replaying the last part. "I love you, Helen. Beep!" Suddenly, I was furious. I had never felt so angry or devastated before. "Shut the hell up, Daryl," I yelled. There was a tense silence between us. I took a deep breath and apologized to my friend. "Did I do something wrong?" Daryl asked. "I'm sorry, Daryl, it's not you, it's me. I just have this nagging feeling that we're the bad guys in this situation," I said. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Doris, we're not the heroes or the villains here. Our job is just to observe and gather evidence. The targets are judged based on their actions alone. They'd still be guilty even if we weren't involved. What we do helps resolve tough situations." I'd heard that damn speech from Marvin more times than I could count. "Daryl, what if the reason we haven't found any evidence on this guy is because he isn't cheating?" I asked. "You said we only observe. If we were cops, setting up hookers to try and get him to sleep with one would be considered entrapment, right?" He nodded. "I think we've crossed the line from observing to trying to force him into something he's not doing. And that makes us the bad guys," I said. "But he has to be cheating," Daryl insisted. "There has to be something going on. There's no other explanation." "No explanation for what?" I asked. "For putting up with all the crap from his wife," Daryl snapped. "She treats him like garbage and he just takes it." I nodded, and Daryl continued. "Have you seen his wife?" Daryl asked. I nodded again. "She's older than him, doesn't work, has no money other than what he gives her, and she's not exactly a looker," I said. "Not exactly a looker?" Daryl repeated. "That woman looks like Frodo Baggins." "She's also cheating on him," I said. Daryl was taken aback. "Why the hell would he put up with all this?" Daryl asked. "You heard it on the phone, Daryl," I said sadly. "He loves her. We see her as a lazy, freeloading, unfaithful, ugly piece of work. But he loves her. Let's give it tonight and tomorrow. If we don't find anything by then, we'll have to talk to Marvin," I said. Daryl had snagged a perfect gig as a waiter for the dinner. It would let him move around the venue and plant cameras to catch Mark in the act. Despite Daryl's professionalism, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark wouldn't slip up. A part of me was even hoping he wouldn't. The dinner dragged on for almost 4 hours. Mark didn't arrive for the first hour, likely due to nerves from the earlier presentation. When he did show up, he was subdued, mingling with business contacts and having dinner with them. It was evident that Mark's enthusiasm had faded, possibly due to missing the presentation or his wife's behavior. None of the 3 escorts managed to catch his attention. Despite several women asking him to dance, he politely declined, citing his wedding ring. I initially thought he simply couldn't dance. However, when a young girl no older than 13 asked him to dance, he joined her on the floor effortlessly. Afterward, he declined more dance offers using his ring as an excuse. I wondered why I couldn't find a guy like that. Helen. Can you imagine the audacity of that jerk? I blurted out angrily. How dare he interrupt me with his petty bullcrap? Where did we leave off? I paced back to Robert and knelt down. Suddenly, he seized me firmly by the shoulders and spun me around. He spat on my lower back. No, Bobby, I pleaded softly. Not there. It still hurts from earlier today. All right, he responded. I don't want to coerce you into anything you're uncomfortable with. Now, where did I put my coat? You can proceed, I murmured faintly. What was that? He demanded, raising his voice. I said you can do it in my A, I replied. Nope, he said, I think I'll be leaving now. It doesn't sound like you really want me to do it. Bobby, I'm begging you. I said, please do it. You can do it anytime you want. This part of my body belongs to you. Truthfully, I hated it. After a few minutes, the pain went away and I started to enjoy it. However, he soon pulled out and did it in my face, a sight he enjoyed. I knew better than to try to wipe it off. He liked to see me covered in his fluid and had even taken pictures of me in that state. Afterward, he added a humiliating touch by spitting on me. When Robert headed to the bathroom, he returned with a new idea. He smiled as he relieved himself on me, increasing my humiliation. I silently resolved to clean up before Mark came home. Once Robert finished, I had to crawl after him on my knees and doing BJ, trying to ignore my revulsion as he relished the act. Your wife doesn't do this for you, does she, baby? I said. I'd never let her, he said roughly, because I love her and she's not a hoe. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. Robert, we need to talk, I said, struggling to find the right words. His earlier comment, I love her, echoed in my mind. Did he no longer care about me? And when he said, she's not a hoe, was that his view of me? Bobby, I'm pregnant, I said, hoping to gauge his reaction. Why are you telling me this? He shot back. Are you saying we can't hook up anymore because you and your husband are expecting a baby? Fine, let this be our last time. Honestly, it hasn't been much fun lately anyway. To be frank, Helen, you're getting a bit old for this. It's time you used your head instead of just your body. Having a kid will surely make your husband happy. Robert, it's not his baby. It's yours, I screamed. Don't be ridiculous, you stupid hoe, he yelled. There's no way I'm getting tied to you. You need to handle this pregnancy today. I'm not going to jeopardize my marriage for a fling with an old woman. Deal with it and don't contact me until it's sorted. He stormed out of my house, snatching his clothes in a hurry. I was left sitting on the floor, stunned. It felt like an eternity before I heard a voice. Hello, is anyone there? A matronly Hispanic woman stood in my living room. Seeing me on the floor, she rushed over. Mrs. Harris, she asked, and I nodded numbly. She carefully stepped around a puddle of urine on the hardwood floor. Are you all right? She asked. I shook my head, feeling like things would never be okay again. I've messed up so badly, I admitted. I spent the next few minutes pouring out my troubles. She listened without judgment, even as I shared the details of what I'd done for Robert and recounted our history. Even before I married my current husband, I knew Robert. My first husband died while serving in the army. While he was deployed in the Gulf War, I was at home having an affair with Robert. After my husband's death, my guilt led me to end things with Robert. Years later, when I had remarried and was trying to move on, partly because of Mark's unconditional love, Robert came back into the picture. Mark has always treated me better than I could have hoped for. He's younger than me and puts me on a pedestal, giving me anything I want. But I have some deep-seated issues. As nice as it is to be adored and elevated, sometimes I just need to be brought down and ducked. I thought Robert loved me too. I had imagined a future where we both got divorced and moved in together to raise our baby. Now I see that's not going to happen, and it leaves me in a terrible situation. Maybe your husband won't find out the baby isn't his, she suggested. Mark has a very rare blood type, I said. Every time we visit the hospital, they urge him to donate. Sooner or later, the truth will come out. She shook her head. The ironic thing is that I genuinely love being married to Mark, I confessed. I appreciate how caring he is and how he loves me unconditionally. I also enjoy the way younger women throw themselves at him, knowing they don't stand a chance. Robert was never meant to replace Mark. He was supposed to be an addition. I guess I wanted to have my loving husband and an extra wicked thrill on the side, I told her. When I found out I was pregnant, I was sure the baby was Robert's. I really wished it was Mark's instead. Mark would have made an amazing father, but the timing was all wrong. I started treating Mark poorly because, despite his love for me, I knew he wouldn't tolerate this situation. Mark is the kindest, most laid-back guy, but he won't share either his woman or his car with anyone. I began planning my divorce weeks ago. Robert claimed Mark was likely cheating on me while he was traveling, so I hired an agency to tail him. My lawyer warned me that, if we divorce, especially with the baby not being Mark's, but conceived during our marriage, I might not fare well. The woman simply looked at me and shook her head. Normally, what I'm about to tell you would be considered good news, she said, but unfortunately, it won't be for you. Listen to this. She played a recording of Mark's phone calls and a log of his activities at the convention. They had even gone as far as hiring hookers to try to catch him, but he didn't even dance with other women. Your husband is not cheating on you, she confirmed. The real blow was hearing our phone call from yesterday. While I was busy trying to get back to Robert, I hadn't noticed how emotionally drained Mark sounded. Hearing him say he loved me right before I hung up made me feel even worse. Doris. Early this morning, I decided I couldn't continue with the case and asked Marvin to send a replacement for Daryl. I packed up and planned to leave once my replacement arrived. Feeling a sudden urge, I went to the convention center for breakfast and saw Amy and Mara setting up their booth. I grabbed coffee and French toast and sat at the last available table. Mark arrived soon after. I noticed Amy's immediate interest and called Mark over to my table, insisting he sit next to me despite his hesitation. I introduced him to Daryl, whom I falsely claimed was my husband. As Mark relaxed, we had a great conversation, including a discussion about his Mustang and his love story with Helen. She had been his babysitter growing up, and he had fallen for her despite her being 10 years older than him. He'd fallen for her when he was just 6 and she was 16, and he never stopped loving her. She had gotten married, but her husband was killed in the military or something similar. Mark had helped her through her depression and encouraged her to start living again. A few years later, he proposed, but she flatly refused due to their age difference. He kept asking her daily until she finally said yes. I had somehow fallen for this man over the past few days. My realization was abruptly interrupted by the commotion. "You lying, heartless, low-life witch!" he yelled. I turned from Mark to see the man causing the commotion. He was the same guy who had glared at me at the party the night before. He lunged at me, missing by inches and causing me to fall over my chair. Daryl attempted to intervene but was struck in the face with a metal chair and fell to the ground, unmoving. I was on the floor, tangled in my chair, trying to reach my taser. The man loomed over me, furious and ready to strike. Fear overwhelmed me, and I might have leaked a bit out of sheer terror. Daryl was just starting to get up, but he wouldn't make it in time. Amidst the chaos, someone shouted for security. I braced myself for the blow, but it never came. Mark, who had intervened, caught the punch and put the man in a wrestling hold, forcing him to the ground. The man crumpled and began crying. "Don't trust anything she says," the man insisted. "She acts like she's interested in you, but she's really a private investigator hired by my ex-wife to catch me cheating. I lost everything in the divorce. I only see my kids once a year." Finally, security arrived, took the man into custody, and escorted him away. Security arrived, took the man away, and Mark reassured him that it would be okay. When Mark asked if the man's claims were true, I explained that my job involves helping people address their doubts in relationships, providing reassurance or evidence as needed for smooth divorces. "I'm such an idiot," he said. "We've only just met, but I liked you. I thought maybe we could be friends. I've been feeling down because it seems like Helen isn't happy with me anymore. I was hoping you could give me advice to win her love back. What a fool I am." "She hired you, didn't she?" I nodded slowly. I wanted to tell you, I said. But don't worry. The report will show her how much you love her. You're clear. Even as I said it, I knew my words were hollow and meaningless. Mark, who had just begun to let me into his circle, now faced the double blow of my dishonesty and his wife's lack of trust despite his deep love. I was devastated and unprepared for more trouble. When Amy confronted me with her usual arrogance, I lost my patience and punched her, causing her to stagger and clutch her swelling mouth. I then tried to wake Daryl, who was groggy and complaining about a sore neck, and took him to the emergency room.
Mark. After discovering at breakfast that Doris wasn't a friend, I caught the first flight home. I realized Helen had been distant due to mistrust, likely fueled by someone suggesting I was cheating. I needed to prove my faithfulness and reassure her of my deep, long-standing love. Upon picking up my black Mustang at the airport, I rushed home. The house felt unsettling as I approached the door. My neighbor, Ricky Ricardo, called out with his thick Cuban accent, but his wife, Lucy, informed me that Helen was at the hospital. I drove to the hospital and waited over an hour while Helen was treated. I filled out medical forms and explained the situation to the staff before seeing her. Sitting by her hospital bed, I felt overwhelming guilt and questioned whether her ending attempt were linked to her suspicions about me. When Helen regained consciousness, she revealed her deep love for me, but also her concerns. She had heard from a friend that I might be unfaithful, which worried her given our age difference. Ironically, the only woman I had noticed was the investigator she hired. Helen had engaged private investigators to check on me, driven by her love and determination to fight for our relationship. However, she was also hiding a serious issue. She had been aped weeks earlier and felt immense shame, leading to her withdrawal and depression. On top of that, she discovered she was pregnant with another man's child, which made her feel trapped, especially as we had delayed starting our own family. Overwhelmed, she had decided to end her life. Processing this, I embraced her, assuring her that nothing would tear us apart and expressing my deep love. We both cried until a nurse informed me I needed to go home and could return the next day. The nurse also mentioned that Helen would be staying in the hospital for a while. She would need to be under observation for 72 hours and then evaluated by a therapist before she could be discharged. When I got home, I sat down on the couch, overwhelmed by everything that was happening. There was a knock at the door. I answered it to find Lucy Ricardo again. She handed me a sealed envelope addressed to me. She explained that a woman had come to her door and instructed her to give me the envelope. I thanked Lucy and went back inside. Lucy seemed reluctant to leave, likely driven by her curiosity and inclination to get involved. Once alone in my living room, I opened the envelope and was stunned by what I found. The envelope contained a note written in crayon, making it impossible to identify the handwriting. The note read, "Don't be a fool. She's cheating on you. It's his baby. She's lying." Along with the note were a couple of disturbing photos. One was a close-up of Helen's face, smeared with dried white fluid, particularly around her mouth. The other photo showed Helen with an older man, whom I didn't recognize, having closeness on our sofa. The man was standing behind her back, and her expression suggested she was enjoying it. There was also an audio tape where Helen confessed everything to another woman. On its own, I might have dismissed the note. The photos could have been fake, but hearing Helen's voice on the tape, along with the note and pictures, was enough to devastate me. I spent the night huddled on the couch. At one point, I realized I was lying on the same couch where Helen had been with that man, and I almost lost my lunch. I'd always believed I'd love Helen forever. Deep down, I still did, but I couldn't reconcile the way she'd treated me. I had proof she cheated, yet she didn't trust me enough to believe I was faithful. What hurt the most was how she had looked me in the eye and lied about everything. I wasn't even sure if her ending attempt was real or just a ploy to gain my sympathy while she spun her lies. The next morning, I requested personal time off from work. Instead of confronting Helen with the evidence and demanding details about the affair, I chose to distance myself. I was deeply hurt and needed to clear my head, so I decided to escape my troubles by signing up for a racing camp to try something new. Although I didn't need to improve my driving skills, I wanted a change of pace. From the road, I called my lawyer to begin preparing divorce papers. It seemed contradictory that someone who deeply loved his partner could suddenly want nothing to do with her, but being deceived and feeling undervalued made it plausible. I still had strong feelings for Helen but doubted her love for me. I explained the situation to my lawyer, including the evidence, and played part of the tape. He sympathized and agreed to handle the case. The camp was in Arizona, so I had plenty of time to think during the drive. Just before dark, my cell phone rang. I expected it to be my lawyer, but it was Helen. It seemed this was the first time she'd been allowed to use the phone. She said she'd been worried all day. "Where have you been, honey?" she asked. "Helen, you might be confusing me with Robert," I said coldly. "I think you dialed the wrong number. This isn't your honey. It's just your clueless husband who's loved you since he could barely walk." She fell silent, and I could hear her breathing, but she didn't respond. "I've learned a lot about people over the past few days, Helen. Maybe I was too trusting or just plain naive, but that's all done now," I said. "Please don't call me again. I've already told my lawyer how I want to handle the divorce. You have until the end of the week to take everything you want from the house. After that, I'm putting it up for sale." "Mark, please, I know I messed up," she said. "We need to talk this out. I think I'm having a midlife crisis or something. I'll get therapy. We don't have to end things like this. We can work through it. I'll never see Robert again. I'll put the baby up for adoption or do whatever you want. Please don't leave me, Mark. You love me." I ended the call. It rang again 5 minutes later. I saw her number on the caller ID and didn't bother answering. Over the next hour, she left me 14 messages, all of which I deleted without listening. I felt utterly foolish. I'd been in love with Helen since before most of my friends even noticed girls. In fact, I fell for her before I even had an interest in girls. When she first started babysitting me, I thought girls were just pointless and odd. I didn't see any reason to be friends with them. They weren't good at baseball, couldn't climb trees, and were terrified of frogs. What use were they? On the other hand, they were into dolls and ridiculous games, which seemed completely pointless to me. But when Helen babysat me, it was a game changer. She took an interest in everything I said and spoke to me in a way that made me feel special. I followed her around like a lovesick puppy and never grew out of it. She could get me to do things simply by asking, things that my parents either couldn't get me to do or had to threaten me to make happen. I'd do anything for Helen. Conversely, I always had a strong dislike for any boy Helen dated. I couldn't stand the thought of anyone else wanting her. I remember when Helen turned 18 and started seeing Jeremy Martin. I was just 8 at the time, and while Helen made my bedtime snack and read me a story, my parents never did that. Helen would sit with me, hold my hand, and give me gentle kisses on my forehead and cheeks until I drifted off to sleep. While Helen was busy getting my Oreos, I went back to the living room to grab my favorite toy car, a Mustang, of course. I overheard that jerk on the phone with a friend, bragging that once Helen put me to bed, he was planning to hook up with her and then dump her the next day. He didn't really care about her and thought she was flat-chested. He had put up with her nonsense long enough without getting anything in return. So he was determined that tonight would be the end, and he wouldn't accept any resistance. I went back to my room, fuming. I didn't understand everything Jeremy was saying, but I didn't like it. When Helen came into my room, we noticed each other. I saw that Helen was wearing perfume, which I didn't like because it smelled like flowers, and I thought flowers were as useless as girls. I preferred Helen's natural scent. Helen left the room, and shortly afterward, I heard shouting and screaming from the living room. I got out of bed to check and saw Jeremy pushing Helen down onto the sofa. He was undoing his belt and standing over her. Although I now understand what he intended at the time, my 8-year-old mind thought he was about to give my Helen a beating. Fuming, I grabbed a baseball from the dining room table and threw it with all my might. The ball struck Jeremy squarely on the back of his head, and he collapsed instantly. Helen hugged me as I stood over him, glaring. Helen quickly got Jeremy up and out of the house. From then on, I was her hero. She made playful comments about marrying me when I was older, which I took seriously at the time. Years later, I realized I hadn't truly rescued Helen from Jeremy. I'd only postponed it. Less than 2 weeks later, Jeremy had closeness with Helen and then discarded her, passing her around to friends. This was likely the start of Helen's downward spiral, driven by her need for abusive relationships. Despite my love and devotion, it meant nothing compared to her destructive patterns. I decided to move on from Helen. She broke my heart, but I knew I'd recover. She could take half of my possessions, but not my dignity or heart. At the race camp, I learned a lot about driving, from gear usage to shifting techniques and track lines. My passion for driving my Mustang was reignited, and I planned to make returning to the camp a regular experience.
Doris. I saw that Mark had charged a weekend seminar at a race driving school to his credit card. While I was concerned for him, since performance driving schools, although generally safe, have had their share of accidents and fatalities, I also knew that escaping from the people who had hurt him, including me, would be beneficial for him. The school he chose was in Arizona, so it would take him a few days to get there. I tracked his cell phone to see where he was. All I needed was for him to answer the call, and the tracking system would do the rest. When he answered, I couldn't resist speaking to him. "Mark, where are you?" I asked. He didn't recognize my voice, which was understandable since he had only heard it a few times, but it still stung. "It's your best friend," I said before hanging up. The next day, when Mark arrived at the track, I saw him drive into the parking lot and check in. I was working as an assistant cook at the only restaurant on the premises. It was the perfect temporary job, giving me access to all areas of the grounds. Mark would probably visit the restaurant at least twice a day, if not more, and he wouldn't see me since I'd be working in the back of the kitchen. I wore a brunette wig and large glasses, and I still had men hitting on me. I almost lost the job the first time Mark came into the restaurant. Brandy, the waitress, attached herself to Mark before he even sat down. She was all over him, rubbing his arm as she helped him to his seat, and accidentally brushing her chest against his shoulder as she handed him a menu. She even leaned over him, putting her rear right in his face, to give him a knife and fork, despite already having silverware wrapped in napkins in her apron's pocket. When Brandy returned to the kitchen, she had a smug grin on her face. "I'm going to have a great time with this one," she said. "Maybe I'll marry him and have his babies." I used to like Brandy, but after that encounter, she came very close to getting tased and choked that morning. On the other hand, I had a good laugh when she left a note with her phone number on Mark's table, and later returned to find it still there. That afternoon, as I watched him drive, I found myself gripping the bench tightly every time he took a sharp turn at high speed. It became clear to me that I had a serious issue. My initial reason for tailing Mark was to make amends for the disruption my investigation had caused in his life. When I first entered his life, Mark was a genuinely happy and kind person who loved his wife and believed she loved him too. I had played a part in stripping that away from him. Even though he still had a good job and a decent life, I wanted him to find someone who could replace the love that I had helped destroy. This made me wonder why I didn't want him to end up with Brandy. I convinced myself that I needed to evaluate her first. I also told myself I needed to handle his divorce properly. I wasn't going to let that old woman take him for everything he had. I have to give Marvin a lot of credit. He could have just fired me, but instead he let me work on my own schedule. I could be involved in cases while still managing my babysitting job, which was how he described keeping an eye on Mark. This arrangement would benefit Marvin in the long run, but that's a story for another time. Over the years, I developed relationships with many local lawyers. We often referred clients to each other. Lawyers would send clients to a private investigator for divorce evidence, and vice versa. So it was no surprise to me when I realized I knew Mark's attorney. Mark was giving that worn-out, hobbit-looking witch far more than she deserved just to get rid of her. Meanwhile, she was fighting desperately to stop or delay the divorce. I have to admit that my actions were just as underhanded as hers, but I was determined to protect Mark from her. I had Carla call her repeatedly, offering advice that, while it seemed helpful, was actually working against her. When Carla spoke with her and she confessed how much she missed Mark and would do anything to have him back, we made sure to destroy that recording. When she mentioned that she wanted to get back with him because she didn't want to get a job, which she found undesirable, I made sure that conversation was recorded and given to Mark's lawyer. In an ideal world, everyone would be honest and straightforward. But let's be honest, such a world would be incredibly dull, wouldn't it? I happened to know a clerk at the courthouse who frequently met with the wife of one of his close friends. I also had photos of these meetings. In return for those photos, he assigned Mark and Helen's divorce case to a judge notorious for his disdain for cheaters. This judge was known for disregarding sentencing guidelines in cases where deceit and infidelity were extreme. He had once been wronged by a woman himself. So, when Mark went to court, he was prepared to lose half of his assets, but was stunned when he found out otherwise. An anonymous source had left a file on the judge's desk detailing how Helen had hired our agency to spy on Mark while she was cheating on him. The file also included information on how some operatives tried to trick Mr. Harris into infidelity at Mrs. Harris's request. Additionally, the selectively edited conversation with Carla and the original file I sent to Mark were included. I think Mark might have spotted me in the back of the courtroom, disguised in the same way I was in the restaurant, but I'm not certain he recognized me. The judge was furious. His anger led him to grant the divorce and award Mark an unprecedented 80-20th split, with no alimony or child support since the baby wasn't his. Helen had a breakdown in the courtroom and, in the days that followed, desperately tried to contact Mark, leading him to secure a restraining order. Her behavior escalated to the point where she had to be institutionalized. Still on Mark's healthcare plan, he visited her a few times. During one visit, he attended a therapy session from the back of the room, and in a brief conversation, advised her to move on and return to Robert. He offered financial help, but emphasized he wanted to move on with his life and thanked her for their past happiness. Mark had no intention of seeing her again, but was called back the next day. Helen, whose room had barred windows, had broken one of them. A few hours after Mark's visit, Helen placed her neck on the windowsill and called for an orderly. When he entered, she calmly said, "There's a note on the desk," and then, with a smile, said, "Goodbye," before taking her own life. Helen struck the rod holding the window, causing it to slam shut on her throat. It was a tragic end for someone so troubled. I can't say I was saddened. Given how she treated the man who loved her, she got what she deserved. Mark never saw the note Helen left. I destroyed it immediately after receiving it and paid the orderly $300. The note read, "Mark, I can't live knowing you no longer love me. I'm leaving for a better place, hoping you'll join me soon so we can be together forever. Love, your Helen forever." Helen was delusional to think I'd let Mark see such a letter. She was trying to guilt-trip him, hoping he'd follow her lead, which I couldn't allow. 6 months later, Mark started seeing Brandy, and they became intimate. He visited Arizona every other weekend. When he was in town, Brandy was with him, but otherwise, she was free to sleep with others. Mark later received a file from his best friend containing photos of Brandy with several men on the new bed he had bought for her trailer. Mark showed Brandy the photos during his next visit to Arizona. She begged for another chance, but he told her he'd talk to her later and never returned. Mark dated other women intermittently but didn't seem happy. I was surprised when he dated Mara from the convention, but it didn't last. Mark fell into a depression and there was nothing I could do to help him.
Mark. Last night, as I was heading out of the office, a large black man stepped in front of me. He looked somehow familiar. "Mark, can we talk?" he asked. I nodded. I didn't have any other plans. "Could we grab a beer somewhere and chat?" he suggested. I nodded again. "Do you still go to Arnold's?" he asked. I gave a third nod. "Meet me there in 10 minutes, he said, and then left. I took my time driving my car to Arnold's, trying to recall where I had seen him before. When I arrived at the bar, I scanned the room and saw him sitting at a table with a big Hispanic guy. I went over and joined them. "Mark, first off, I want to thank you for saving me 16 months ago. That guy came out of nowhere. If you hadn't intervened, he might have killed me and Doris," the man said. "Now I remember you. You're the husband of that meddlesome investigator. Your wife helped to make my life miserable. If I'd known who you were or what you were up to, I probably wouldn't have stopped him," I retorted. The two men looked at each other and then laughed. "Yeah, you would have," Daryl said. "You've always been a Boy Scout." Both men nodded and took a sip of their beers. I signaled to a waitress I knew, and she went behind the bar to get my favorite drink. The two men were drinking Coronas, and they gave me odd looks when she placed my drink in front of me. "I don't always drink beer," I said, "but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis." After that, we all laughed like old friends. "So what's this about?" I asked. "This is about Doris," Daryl said. "She's become obsessed, distressed, and deeply unhappy. And honestly, I can't deal with it anymore." "Consider yourself fortunate," I retorted. "At least you have a wife. What's troubling her? Have you run out of people to mess with?" "She's upset about you," Daryl replied calmly. "Doris is probably too proud to admit it, but she's in love with you." "I haven't seen her since the convention," I said. Both men laughed again. "Of course not," Daryl said. "She's excellent at her job. Since then, she's been keeping track of you. When you went to Arizona, she was the dark-haired woman at the restaurant. She also handed over the file to the judge during your divorce. She was the voice on the phone pretending to be your best friend, providing information about the waitress you were seeing and others who weren't good for you over the past 16 months. She's essentially put her life on hold just to keep an eye on you. I was stunned and took a sip of my beer. Why is she following me? I asked, bewildered. She's not my wife, and I've already told you she loves you, Daryl said. And remember how well you two got along before the incident. I think you might have feelings for her as well. They both glanced at me. I recalled that Doris was quite attractive, and I had been feeling guilty throughout our conversation at the convention. Even though we were just talking, it felt like I was being unfaithful to Helen. So, what do you need from me? I asked. All I'm asking is that you sit down and talk with her, Daryl replied.
Doris. I got a call from Marvin on my day off and was really annoyed. I had plans and needed to review the personnel files of every eligible woman at Mark's company. I couldn't risk another situation like Mara's. Just thinking about him with someone like her broke my heart. I wanted to find a genuinely nice girl for him, someone he could truly love and start a family with. It would be painful when he found someone, but I wanted her to be absolutely perfect for him. Marvin told me to dress up and look presentable. He was tired of me coming to work looking worn out. I showered, put on a nice dress, and went to the address Marvin provided. I realized I'd been there before. It was one of Mark's favorite spots. I hoped he wasn't around. Marvin met me in the parking lot and handed me the assignment. I was supposed to do surveillance on a guy who might be cheating on his girlfriend. I was about to refuse because I don't handle those cases anymore. Since Mark, I only deal with insurance fraud or similar issues. Please do this one for me, Marvin pleaded. This guy is a real jerk. He's nothing like your Mark. Why did Marvin refer to him as my Mark? Did everyone think I was falling for him? Marvin, don't ask me to do this again, I snapped. He's at the third table on the right, Marvin said with a smile. Thanks, Doris. You won't regret this. I will if Mark gets hurt or has his heart broken while I'm stuck watching your jerk, I retorted. What puzzled me was why Marvin was grinning so broadly as I entered the bar. I sat down and ordered a glass of white wine. As I watched the guy, he was nervously fidgeting, classic behavior of someone who's cheating. Suddenly, all my instincts kicked in. I was ready to take this guy down hard. It's people like him who make things difficult for the good guys like my Mark. Did I really just think of him that way? I was focused on the task when, believe it or not, someone played my favorite song on the jukebox. I was humming along to Private Eyes, when, as the third verse started, I realized I'd been set up. Why try to hide your true self from me? I'm a spy, but I'm on your side. The song played. I got up and walked over to the table. When I sat down across from the man, I noticed his greasy long hair was actually a wig, and his large nose and glasses were part of a Groucho Marx mask from a novelty store. I laughed as Daryl Hall and John Oates sang, "Slip on into any disguise. I'll still know you, look into my private eyes." I removed the mask to reveal Mark's familiar face. "It took you a while to catch on," he said with a laugh. "I thought you were supposed to be a private eye. If I hadn't requested that song, I might have been waiting here all night." He chuckled. "So, what brings you here, Doris?" he asked. "Something I've wanted to do for a long time," I replied, leaning in for a kiss. The kiss was even better than I had hoped, lasting around 10 minutes and conveying everything he needed to know about me. I already knew everything about him. In the end, as with every pursuit I've ever been on, I got my man. That night at Arnold's might have marked the end of Private Eyes, but it was just the start of Doris and Mark. We've been happily together since then, but that's a story for another time.